Hey everyone, I'm Hassan Minhaj. Welcome to the 69th annual Scripps Howard Awards, one of the biggest nights in American journalism. Now look, there's no red carpet, no paparazzi, and no one will be getting slapped tonight. I hope, because these awards are for people who are not acting a part, but are fulfilling a role that an open democratic society cannot function without. You'll meet the journalists behind some of the biggest stories of 2021, hear from people they've interviewed, find out what it took to tell those stories, and see why every single one of them deserves the $160,000 total in prize money awarded tonight. We'll be celebrating the best in American journalism, highlighting an amazing slate of stories from across the nation.
Working moms who are homeless are taking matters into their own hands.
We will go behind the scenes and into the communities where these journalists work diligently to find the truth, checking their facts, vetting their sources, and often risking their own safety to bring us information that is vital to a functioning democratic society.
The work that we were doing was potentially going to change lives.
And I've never worked on a project that had this kind of an impact.
We won.
This work is just beginning.
We'll cap off the night with the announcement of the coveted Impact Award and the $10,000 in prize money that goes with it to one of the 42 finalists whose story had the most impact last year. The 69th Scripps Howard Awards start now. Good evening and welcome. As some of you may know, I'm a comedian in real life. So you may be asking, what am I doing hosting a journalism award show? And why should you watch a show like this? I mean, you got a wide variety of binge-watching options like Netflix or Apple TV+. So why sit through 2 hours of what might seem like journalists congratulating themselves for doing their jobs? These are good questions. So here's the thing. A journalist's job these days has gotten a lot more difficult. There's a small but loud minority calling their work fake news. The US public's trust in journalism is at an all-time low. Now with this in mind, nobody is getting dressed up tonight. No red carpet, no podium. Instead, we've decided to show you what journalists actually do so that you understand the work, the time it takes to find out the truth, to earn the trust of real people, to expose corruption, to highlight heroism, to take on the system on behalf of the citizens. To bring you these stories behind the stories, the Scripps Howard production team spent 3 months in the field. And you know what stood out the most? That journalists are normal people. They're just like us. They care about their communities. They take real pride in their work. They have integrity, and like the best of us, they're trying to make the world a better place. And of course, we hope that you'll enjoy yourself tonight. All of these stories are fascinating and unique. And we hope that when it's all over, you'll have a deeper understanding of what reporting is, an appreciation of what journalists do, and a renewed faith in the stories that they bring you. So let's get started. First up, the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in the Coverage of Breaking News. Breaking news coverage is the ER of journalism. Those who do it need to get on the scene first, make sense of the story as it's unfolding, and try to stay alive so that the public knows what's happening on the ground in real time. The finalists for Breaking News are Richard Engels reporting on the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan for NBC News.
So you left, obviously, the house.
Everything.
This is the start of their new lives as refugees.
I'm hoping, but I don't know if I'll ever be back.
I think through their eyes, you can start to live the events yourself.
Astroworld by the Houston Chronicle.
I contacted dozens of victims. That's how we were able to develop a narrative that went beyond just kind of basic records.
We built this monster timeline, not only with the logs that I obtained, but with radio transmissions, with social media.
We walked the reader through what was happening and at the same time told them at every point what was going wrong.
And The Floods of Waverly by the Tennessean.
It's unbelievable. It was at the edge of their driveways or their yards, and then it was feet deep in their houses minutes later.
Our journalists, they're all Tennesseans. They're authentic, and I think that the people that we cover see that and trust them to share their stories with the world.
And the winner is The Floods of Waverly by the Tennessean.
I think everybody was affected by it some way, shape, form, or fashion. 8, 9, 10. The people in our town, we don't get out of our comfort zone very often, so when something like this happens, it took a little time to kind of open up.
The Tennessean came on our street and just talked to us, not even really interviewing, just talking to us to see how we were.
They came by here first, one of the first places they came.
You don't need to get called to do breaking news. You see it and you jump in.
We know how to be at a scene fast, and we know what needs to be done immediately.
It's definitely an all-hands-on-deck situation. When we began heading that way, flash flood warnings were still active. Roads were closed down in and out of Waverly for days. We would try to get people out of there before the sun went down because it was a maze of just destruction.
Teamwork and collaboration is something that we take a great deal of pride in. It's really the core of who we are. It's in our DNA.
So I was helping schedule out push alerts.
I was down there photographing.
We wrote so many obituaries, and it was really important to convey that these people weren't just victims of a tragedy, but they had really full lives.
What are the stories that we're pursuing then? How do we make sure that we are embedded in the community in a way that no one else is? You build that trust by showing up, showing empathy, and listening.
But I think the people finally started opening up, telling their stories to the Tennessean. Their coverage of the football program was great. Also, I thought they did a really good job of covering our community.
The Tennessean's article has brought in several people, even from outlying areas, because of their coverage, that have come to eat with us, that have come to give us donations, and it has regenerated our business.
We're continuing to find really compelling stories. We recently connected with a couple, Chris and Tracy, who barely knew each other before the flood, but Chris rescued Tracy.
He can't get out. He put his arm around me and helped me to stay above the water. The stranger kissed me on the forehead, and now he's my husband.
The field of local journalism has taken some hits in the last decades, and I think that for smaller towns to have journalists representing them and telling their stories and helping make sure that they're not forgotten is really, really important to this newsroom.
When we return, a sailor stranded on his cargo ship for years is finally rescued by the Wall Street Journal.
To me, the most rewarding journalism is when you have an impact on even one individual's life.
And we're back. In the next category, we'll talk about human interest storytelling. We go to Newsy anchor Alex Livingston for a look at how strong characters with interesting stories are often the best way to understand larger issues that impact all of us.
Hey everyone, well you know, I love to tell stories that really make you feel something, those stories that you just cannot forget. Now I've worked in several TV markets throughout my career, and I've learned that it's those human interest stories about the everyday person, like your neighbor, your pastor, your fireman, your teachers, that make our stories relatable. Among the best stories told this year by journalists are a look at South Los Angeles and the unequal impacts of COVID, an exploration of the roots of violence in a Boston family, and the ordeal of sailors stranded at sea. And the finalists for this year's Award for Excellence in Human Interest Storytelling honoring Ernie Pyle are Disease, Inequity, and Resilience in South LA by the LA Times.
The area in which the hospital resides is impoverished. And so we decided that we needed not only to focus on COVID, we needed to focus on why this hospital was dealing with so many COVID patients.
The vast majority of people here use the emergency room as their doctor. Imagine having to do that.
The Good Hope Foundation gave us an incredibly generous gift of $2.5 million. I really think the reporting clinched the deal.
Under the Will by the Boston Globe.
At the heart of this story is a really difficult question that many of us reflexively turn away from, and it's violence. Where does it come from?
Anthony Pledger, his criminal record starts very young. It felt confusing because he seemed good, and the whole story is really an effort to reconcile those two things.
Abandoned at Sea by the Wall Street Journal.
Unscrupulous shipping owners will move their ships into certain regions where they can abandon them.
And they leave the people who are working on their ship at sea. And sometimes people stay on those ships for years, hoping to recoup lost wages.
I was losing my mind.
And the fact that we work for the world's biggest business newspaper immediately started to change the situation.
It was really like waking up from a nightmare.
So, the winner is Under the Wheel, a narrative exploring the roots of violence in a Boston family.
I was very scared to publish this story. It's very difficult to write in an empathetic way about a person who has destroyed other people's lives. The pleasure I inherited from implying pain and fear mixed with anger done something to me. I pulled out a gun and aimed it at my mother's beautiful face. The moment was Anthony's father went to federal prison on drug and gun charges. His mom was the getaway driver for a bank robbery. 2 brothers are in prison for murder. And the crime that sent him to federal prison was the attempted sex trafficking of 2 teenage girls.
Evan is one of the best reporters I know. She knows where to look. She knows how to find records. She knows how to find people.
Anthony tells the judge, I won't make their mistakes into my excuses, but just know that it was hard to fly like a swan when you was born as a duck. And it was just such a striking way to put it that I thought, I have to talk to this person. The thing about Anthony is that he's bracingly straightforward. The first really personal question he asked me was, what are your struggles? And I don't usually answer questions about myself. And I told him, you know, as a teenager, I was mentally ill and I was hospitalized repeatedly for it. This was something that ran in my family, and it was something that I was afraid I would pass on to my daughter.
Evan using herself in that article made it that much more powerful. I knew of Anthony Pledger, I knew his victims. This piece brought incredibly important information and thinking around commercial sexual exploitation. We need that to change things.
She's a student of the human condition. It's not something you always see in a hard-bitten, dogged reporter. And certainly that was the thing that shines through so radiantly from this story, is it aches with humanity.
Crime is often boiled down to good versus evil, and that's not helpful. It's not true, and it's not helpful. And I don't know if you can escape your past, but we sort of decided that it's the fight that's the point.
The next category is innovation, where the nominees found ways to put clever tools, citizen sleuths, and even catchy tunes to work in the service of news. The finalists for innovation are Black Snow, Big Sugar's Burning Problem by the Palm Beach Post and ProPublica.
Residents had complained for years about illnesses that they'd claimed were linked to sugarcane burning, pollution, ash and soot that rained on the community.
The reporters set up these monitors and they did the science from the bottom up.
The hypothesis is that it will add up and become pretty conclusive about what the state of the area actually is in this area, that legislators might have to take action.
The Outlaw Ocean Music Project by the Outlaw Ocean Project.
We produce long-form narrative investigative stories about human rights and environmental abuses at sea. We convert the stories into art. Artist X puts up an album on Spotify. It's got sound elements from the reporting. The imagery is from the reporting. Literally not a week goes by when we don't get several emails from folks who say, I was listening the other day to fill in the blank. I clicked over and wow.
And Citizen Browser by The Markup.
Facebook is a little bit like an airplane. We're literally just journalists out on the tarmac trying to inspect the plane before it flies on behalf of the public.
Facebook said that they had stopped recommending political groups after the January 6 riots. We found that they hadn't.
What you basically have right now is a journalism outlet doing the government's job.
And the winner is the Outlaw Ocean Music Project by the Outlaw Ocean Project.
The ocean is an incredible opportunity. It's 2/3 of the planet that has very few reporters out there doing anything. It's a void journalistically, and it's not a void because there's a lack of stories.
Last March, I got this email from Ian Urbina just out of the blue, and he's like, I'm a real person, I swear. This is my reporting. He said, I want you to take these recordings and write music with them to tell the story.
We will not allow reckless oil drilling.
For me, as soon as I got the email, I was like, oh, I definitely want to work on this project, and I want to focus on the chapter about oil drilling.
We have about 400 musicians from about 55 countries. Hip-hop, electronic, classical, you name it. They make music using sounds from the reporting. In recruiting 400 musicians from around the world and having them read the reporting, you essentially convert a bunch of these other storytellers or artists into advocates for the journalism. We have over 50 million listeners, and 1/10 of those listeners click over to the journalism. We have documentary filmmakers with us and photographers with us. But we also then try to think about an additional life that the journalism can have, usually mediated through art. Animation, where we've got muralists in lots of different countries taking the reporting and converting it into art. In the 24 months that we've existed, we've helped solve a murder that was caught on camera and got the captain, sentenced to 26 years. We helped create 2 MPAs, marine protected areas. We helped certain policies in the US government. Thank you again for your time. That were previously only focused on marine issues at sea to take more into account the human rights concerns that are related to illegal fishing. Creators are all storytellers, and they have their own language. And so if you trust them to take your content and retell the story in their own way, you often can have far more creative impact. I think that's a sort of pay it forward tactic that we've used to good effect.
We'll be back shortly, and when we come back, how the Miami Herald helped answer the tragic question of why a condominium collapsed with almost no warning, killing almost 100 people in the process.
Investigative journalism is what we do. It's the reason we exist. And we've never not put in the resources that were necessary to get the big story. And this was a big story.
Welcome back. To introduce the finalists in the investigative categories, these are like the badasses of journalism, the ones who turn on all the lights and show us what's crawling around, is Diana Fuentes.
Thank you, Hassan. I've had the pleasure of working as an investigative reporter and editor for many years, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. The title may seem glamorous, conjuring up images of exotic locations and meeting dangerous people, but the truth is we spend most of our time in places like this, the Bexar County Clerk's Office in downtown San Antonio. We search through court records for signs of corruption and analyze data, looking for clues to shed light on what's really going on behind the scenes. It's an important job. It's my pleasure to present to you today the finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Local and Regional Investigative Reporting. And the finalists are Black Children Jailed for a Crime That Doesn't Exist by Nashville Public Radio's WPLN News and ProPublica.
Police show up at an elementary school. They arrest 4 children. What they were accused of doing was standing by while some boys were fighting. That's not a crime.
Our reporting showed that it has only been getting more extreme.
Nobody really cared about it until Maribel and Ken's story blew the lid off the entire case. The judge who was primarily responsible is no longer in power.
House of Cards by the Miami Herald.
12-story apartment complex that sustained a partial collapse.
Is anybody there?
If you're a victim of tragedy, you're not necessarily ready to talk. But sometimes, for some people, their grief turns into anger and a desire to change things.
I am astonished at how much we were able to show people both causes and the propagation of the collapse.
Democracy in Doubt by the Arizona Republic.
The biggest politicians in Arizona say there was no way you lost Arizona. Where are the votes?
It was a moment when the guardrails of our government and our society were really being dismantled.
And the winner for excellence in local and regional investigative reporting is House of Cards by the Miami Herald.
I woke up at about 5:45 a.m. on June 24th to a friend telling me that something terrible had happened. And they said, I don't know how to say this, but a building fell down.
I was talking to the reporters on our I-team very early that day, and before 9 o'clock that morning, we already had our first records request submitted, and we're off to the races.
Back is gone. No, the whole back is gone.
It had withstood major hurricanes, and it had never fallen down. So what on earth happened?
Sarah Blasky's a very quick study, and it became clear that she probably had the best grasp of rudimentary engineering.
Closer to this building behind.
We became a cohesive team of 4 people. Ben Konark, Aaron Leibowitz, later joined by Nick Nehamas. Sarah also led the search for an engineer.
This has a 2.4 million pound capacity. I was very skeptical that anyone was going to get this story right. Sarah made me change my mind. I was looking through all of the different publishing houses like the Herald, for example, and they had put together a sequence of failure, and I thought that it was incorrect, and so I reached out, and that actually was really how our interaction was initiated.
I have to say, Dr. Lehman and I talked on the phone every day for 6 months, multiple hours a day, comparing notes. She's building a model on the supercomputer, testing theories. And I'm out there talking to people, saying, what did you see? And then giving her that information.
We wanted to get our hands on every other bit of information, including body cam footage, the calls to 911, and it was a matter of integrating that all together to tell a narrative that said, here's the best evidence.
We worked with Sohail Al-Jamea and his team to create a scrolly tell where a reader could see this building. And that's where we end up with House of Cards a month and a half later. It is my hope that the people that told me their stories, they understand that that was not in vain, that it does make a difference. It is the reason we have answers today.
In the next category, these investigative journalists cast a broader net and spent months traveling across the world for their projects. The finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in National and International Investigative Reporting are Pandora Papers, A Global Investigation by ICIJ, The Washington Post, and media partners.
It's pretty stunning when you start thinking about how much time it would require one journalist or even one newsroom to go through 12 million documents.
It's being called the Pandora Papers.
More than 12 million documents exposing secret offshore tax havens.
We didn't just rely on the leaked documents. We had to verify that what we were seeing was accurate.
It's estimated that corporations and the super wealthy have stashed away as much as $32 trillion.
The Facebook Files by the Wall Street Journal.
It is a deep dive into the inner workings of Facebook.
In the documents about teenagers and mental health on Instagram, we saw the broadest disconnect between what Facebook had said privately and what Facebook had said publicly.
It was one of the most impactful things that I've been a part of or witnessed up close.
Airstrikes Gone Wrong by the New York Times.
In one of the final acts of its 20-year war in Afghanistan, the United States fired a missile from a drone at a car in Kabul.
The military mistook a car that were following that day for a terrorist.
I found that 1 in 5 coalition airstrikes was resulting in a civilian death. I was able to get to the sites of 100 civilian casualty incidents in Iraq, Syria, as well as in Afghanistan. One of the fathers who lost a child told me the only way he was able to recognize her was because she was wearing a purple dress he bought her the week before.
And the winner of Excellence in National and International Investigative Reporting goes to Pandora Papers, A Global Investigation by ICIJ, The Washington Post, and media partners.
These leaked documents came to ICIJ directly over the course of months. Our tech team was receiving them and uploading them to this central searchable server that ultimately 600 journalists could use.
A little over a year ago, ICIJ approached me about this trove of records, this unprecedented trove of secret records. There were more than 11 million records.
What ICIJ does and what we're known for is contacting journalists around the world, from capital cities in Latin America to Asia to the Middle East to Europe, and encouraging these reporters to put aside their traditional reporting practices and say, this is going to be bigger and better for all if we work together.
They asked if the Washington Post would be interested. Of course, the Washington Post was interested. It was a learning curve too, because as investigative reporters, we're not used to sharing what we find, right? Our notes or our interviews or our photos. But it became clear very quickly that some really shady people from all over the world were breaching the American financial system at the invitation of states like South Dakota and Wyoming, places you would least expect it.
So when we saw names of individuals like the King of Jordan, or when we saw locations like Sioux Falls, South Dakota, of course that was a starting point, but we had to travel around the world, obtain court records, conduct freedom of information requests.
Several African leaders have been implicated in the Pandora Papers scandal.
Prime Minister Babush, any reaction to the Pandora Papers accusations?
Powerful politicians, billionaires, celebrities, religious leaders, even drug dealers.
And I've never worked on a project that had this kind of an impact. The project has sparked, I think, more than 20 international investigations, and it's brought down the governments of 2 countries.
There's always that little voice in the back of your head that says, it's just you, Will. No one else is going to care about this. Maybe your mum, maybe your grandma, but that's the end of the story. So to see a bipartisan group of US lawmakers, to see protesters in continents around the world respond to their Pandora Papers, reaffirms why we poured our blood and guts into this. We will still be talking about the Pandora Papers, I hope and I believe, in not only 6 months, but in 6 years' time.
Stick with us. We'll be right back, where ABC News anchor David Muir will tell us about his first local broadcasting gig.
You can do so much in local news outside of those traditional forms.
Went to the boss and like, hey, we want to make this documentary. Okay, like, can you guys pull this off? And we're like, we think so.
Hello again. We've honored stories from all over the country and around the world. The deeply personal and the broadly political. The news that matters most is sometimes right in our own backyard. To present the stories nominated for excellence in Broadcast Local is ABC World News Tonight's David Muir.
Good evening. Anyone who has ever worked with me knows I am a firm believer local news is so vital. It plays such a crucial role in both informing communities and contributing to a healthy democracy, which has never been more important than it is today. I'm proudly a product of local news. I began interning in Syracuse at 14, then started working at that station in college, and then went from WTVH in Syracuse to WCVB in Boston before coming here to ABC. I know what it is you accomplish every single day, often doing more with less, and you are the ones reporting, investigating issues long before those stories make national news. Local news is the foundation of what I hope to accomplish right here every night, connecting with the viewers, asking the questions they want answered, and giving them the facts, allowing them to make their own informed decisions. I'm honored to be presenting the Broadcast Local Award tonight. The finalists for Broadcast Local coverage are Prone by KUSA TV in Denver.
Law enforcement officers were genuinely surprised when the person below them stopped breathing. After watching our initial prone investigation, his training officers decided they'd use parts of our report in their training for all Denver officers moving forward.
Gideon's Army by WTVF News Channel 5, Nashville.
It's an organization that I think had good motives in terms of it wanted to try to decrease violence in inner city communities. Unfortunately, I think some of the people that they chose to work with undermined that mission.
This wasn't just an investigation about a group. This was an investigation about real people experiencing real problems.
And the Moms of Magnolia Street, NBC Bay Area, KNTV.
The housing crisis is unavoidable in California.
These homeless mothers were going to take over a house, take this extreme action.
We going in. Moms for housing.
Until the police came in this pre-dawn raid. And there was a huge impact in the end that the moms had. They negotiated the sale of the home that they occupied to the Oakland Community Land Trust.
I think that it puts home ownership in the reach of every family that is like mine.
And the winner is Prone by KUSA TV Denver.
This puzzle should have been put together many, many years ago. If it had been, probably more lives would have been saved. I personally looked at dozens of body camera videos. One of the things I found that was overwhelming was that law enforcement officers were genuinely surprised when the person below them stopped breathing. And that showed me that they had not been effectively trained on the dangers of this restraint technique.
Mario Gonzalez, you saw the whole thing play out. One of the officers, once they had him restrained, said, "Should we turn him on his side?" The other officer said,
"I don't want to lose what I got, man."
Okay. "No, I don't want to lose what I got." And that ultimately led to his death. It's just so sad to see him so helpless.
Chris's piece really had some powerful lessons.
After watching our initial prone investigation, his training officers decided they'd use parts of our report in their training for all Denver officers moving forward.
I think the piece speaks for itself. It's powerful, and this has also given us an opportunity to learn and build on, and I'm thankful for that.
Families that spoke with us, they wanted to see change, and I think that was a reason that they ultimately decided to speak with us.
I've been telling families all over the country, your loved one's death isn't an isolated event. And I think that gives comfort in sort of recognizing that this wasn't just a weird, freakish event that was caused by some sort of drugs or sort of mental illness or whatever, that this is a pattern that can be stopped. I think one of the most critical lessons that I learned in all of this is that we have got to stop as journalists reporting what I call press release journalism. So many initial press releases that I saw on these cases were heavy to imply that law enforcement did nothing wrong. And when people tell you that they did everything right, sometimes they're not telling the truth.
And next, we'll pull back the lens for a wider view and to present the finalists in broadcast national and international coverage and hear from an expert on the ground.
Right from the earliest days of my career, self-shooting and producing stories from undercover conflicts in Africa, what has drawn me closest to broadcast journalism is covering those stories others are not reporting on. And so it is my honor to present this year's finalists for excellence in broadcast, national and international coverage. And they are Blindsided and Out of Bounds by ABC News.
Critics say it's discriminatory as it's being used in the NFL concussion settlement program because it assumes black players start at a lower cognitive level than white ones, making it harder for black players to prove enough damage to qualify for payouts.
Intentionally going about making sure that there's two set of metrics used for black players than white players, it's insulting.
Where do those negotiations stand?
I'm on top of this.
48 Hours, Whatever Happened to the Perfect Child by CBS News.
Do you want to rescind the adoption?
We tried everything.
They have made up their mind. Carolee must return to Russia.
To go to the extreme of returning her to Russia, I found shocking.
I don't feel safe stay here.
It was really hard when we left her and we didn't know if she was going to be okay.
Oh my God.
For them to do a follow-up, it was an honor. It did give you closure, and it did give you that, peace of mind that you have shared your story.
And Behind the Badge by CBS Sunday Morning.
I'm honestly afraid to get out. Actually, what's going on?
Why do so many Black Americans not feel seen by the police?
Does it not? It's really hard to get people to talk about this. It's really hard to get police officers to talk about it.
You said a lot of your colleagues now are talking about, considering quitting.
Yes.
Why?
Just because of so much of the anti-police sentiment.
You can do any kind of topic without generating more controversy, but generating some understanding.
And the winner of the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Broadcast, National and International Coverage, honoring Jack R. Howard, is Blindsided and Out of Bounds by ABC News.
2 Black former players suing the league, accusing it of racial discrimination and concussion-related settlements.
Well, we first found out about this story, we saw a lawsuit filed by 2 players, Najee Davenport and Kevin Henry. And this lawsuit alleged that these players couldn't recover the money that they felt they were entitled to because of something called race norming. Critics say it's discriminatory because it assumes black players start at a lower cognitive level than white ones, making it harder for black players to prove enough damage to qualify for payouts. Up until this point, we simply had these players saying, hey, we believe that we were judged differently on the basis of our race. And we saw their lawsuit, the information they gave us.
And so we were getting ready to run the story, and I was sitting in a parking lot kind of berating myself over not doing a very good job. And I got a call, and the source said, well, you've been asking the right questions, you just haven't been asking the right people. The source proceeded to sort of guide me to stronger evidence. Emails between neuropsychologists that had evaluated former players on behalf of the league.
This was the smoking gun we needed, because this showed that doctors felt forced to establish race norming standards.
What was the result of the claim you filed?
I was denied. I felt so betrayed, and I still feel that way.
Now the NFL pledging to end that controversial practice known as race norming, just as the outrage reaches a tipping point.
Those text messages, the information we recovered from the players, eventually the class council and the NFL reversed course.
I was wrong. I need to conduct an investigation, which I'm in the process of doing. And if that results in me having to score everything.
When they shared their stories with me, it reminded me of what all black folks feel in this country, that in many ways we're treated differently and we don't even know it. That resonates with me. That's why we do this job. When there is something not going right in the world, when someone's not being treated fairly, those are the stories we want to cover. That's the wrong we want to make right.
When we come back, we travel to Southlake, Texas, where racial tension in a small town explodes after a disturbing video surfaces.
In that audio that we play in this podcast, you get to hear what's actually happening and what's actually at stake and why it matters.
We are back with a category that fosters one of the most important things we can do as a society, and one that we are absolutely terrible at, and that is listening to each other. Presenting the award for excellence in radio podcast coverage, honoring Jack R. Howard, who led the EW Scripps Company for more than 20 years, here is Farai Chidea, host of The Body Politic.
I grew up in a family that loves to debate everything, especially politics, and we would go at it for everything from abortion to transgender issues, and we did it still with love and care. And that's one of the things that I really love about being a journalist. I've done books, magazines, television, my truest love is audio. I'm currently producing podcasts, and I love the intimacy of audio and how you can cover tough things without going at each other's throats. Yes, that is still possible. And that is a lot of what we're looking for in the Excellence in Radio and Podcasting category. Here are the finalists. Southlake by NBC News.
A 9-second video spread like wildfire through Southlake. It showed a group of 8 white Carroll High School students chanting the N-word.
We realized then that the story of Southlake was really kind of the story of America in 2021.
I think it's also why the podcast ended up resonating with people. Students actually listen to this. Their parents actually listen to this.
Mississippi Rising by Latino USA.
Workers went from being undocumented to then being essential overnight. How do you feel about that?
I mean, you know, that's bull, right? I mean, we've always been essential.
When our team comes down, I think there's this sense of like we matter.
She's not doing this for show. She's doing this because she cares.
And 4 Hours of Insurrection by the Washington Post.
I became trapped in a doorway. I got crushed by the mob trying to break their way in.
I mean, those sounds, just hearing them, in some ways felt even more powerful than seeing them.
It was a day where we knew that journalists were not just going to be covering this and bearing witness, but we were also going to be targeted.
Honest coverage is very important to me, and I think it's very important to the country.
And the winner is Southlake by NBC News.
Controversy in Southlake tonight after teens posted a racist video.
The district
online.
got to work putting together a plan.
Y'all are really gonna do something.
That ended up tearing the town in two.
Just because I do not want critical race theory taught to my children in school does not mean that I'm a racist, damn it.
The outrage spread so fast, it might seem like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't.
From NBC News, I'm Mike Hicksonball.
I'm Antonia Hilton.
And this is Southlake.
The podcast is the story of one community in Texas that went to war over a diversity plan in schools, but it's really the story of America now in 2021 and 2022.
It was really ground zero for what we now all know as the fight over critical race theory that's transpired around the rest of the country. Mike and I really had to pound the pavement and contact dozens of people in this community over the course of about a year of reporting and do our best to build relationships, and in the cases where we couldn't get people to speak to us, to find other ways to make sure that their views were represented.
We're all humans. I don't want to be labeled as black, white, yellow, gay, lesbian. I don't want to be labeled.
We really aim to cut behind and get past the headlines and the noise and make this about the people, particularly the children in this community who were going to school, hearing racial slurs or homophobic slurs in the hallways every day.
Everything, I would say, started coming to a head when my son was told in 6th grade, how do you get a black out of a tree? You cut the rope. And Mike really, and Antonia, had so much respect for me in telling my story, and so much care, and so much empathy and gentle, and it wasn't like pouncing on me.
When Southlake first came out, the response was overwhelmingly positive for many of our listeners.
It immediately shot to #1 on Apple's charts, and the messages we were getting from all over the country multiplied.
They felt like the podcast was a great primer, almost like going through the Wikipedia that could help them make sense of the moment they were living in, but unable to describe.
Them telling the story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is helping to shape this world into a better place.
20 years ago, there were no podcasts, there were no Zooms, no vaccine passes, and definitely no immersive multi-platform anything. But the future is now, and the next award honors excellence in multimedia journalism. Here to present that award is Vice News executive producer and Scripps Howard judge, Subrata Day, coming to us from Brooklyn, New York.
The most powerful journalism is often about telling complex stories in an engaging way, and today there are more ways than ever to tell those stories, from video and podcasts to interactive websites and data visualizations. The finalists for excellence in multimedia journalism are Unresolved by PBS Frontline.
Racially motivated murders have been kind of cyclical throughout our history. The opportunity to be able to design something that memorialized these individuals and also brought their cases that have faded and sometimes gone unresolved to life was something that really excited me about this.
The Vaccine Rollout by Bloomberg News.
This is becoming a pandemic of the unvaccinated.
People were desperate to understand how bad it was, when it was going to get better, when we're going to hit certain thresholds. Bread and butter of Bloomberg's coverage was that tracker.
Numbers are a great way for people to understand a story, but we also wanted to tell other aspects of the vaccine rollout.
And Inside the Capitol Riot from New York Times Visual Investigations.
Certification will happen on both sides of the building, and this is what the rioters want to stop.
5 people died that day. 150 police officers injured, and some of them took their own lives afterwards. I mean, this is a significant event. We felt this story needed to be done justice.
And the winner is Unresolved by PBS Frontline.
Unresolved is a project that has wide scope. Frontline really wanted to examine the Emmett Till list, which was a list of people who were, we believe, and we are now showing in our project, racially motivated killings in the civil rights era. And on this list are a number of people that we've never actually reported on, told their stories. We worked with an incredible artist, Tamara Shagalu, and she created a landscape in which these stories would live.
I was responsible for designing the augmented reality installation aspect and the web interactive.
Hidden in the forest, behind each tree, is the story of a person whose case was re-examined under the Till Act.
I started looking at how, as African Americans, have we been telling our stories, and I was drawn to quilting. And I was inspired by the Say Their Names movement as a way to allow people to interact with the quilt.
Go closer to the names. Say it. Learn about this person and what happened.
Somewhere during the scuffle, one of the men produced a 2x4 and crushed my grandfather's skull with it.
I had a personal motivation and connection to this that made me decide that this was something I really wanted to tell and be involved in. I also think that within my generation and other younger generations, sometimes people think of the civil rights as being something from the past, from a long time ago. And I thought that technology would be a good way to bridge that gap and connect the past with the present, essentially.
It's not often that you have artists and journalists working side by side. And the fact that she was so engaged and we were so engaged with her back really led to the magic of what she was able to create with her team.
We premiered it in New York in Battery Park. Some of the family members were able to come to New York. It was an extremely powerful experience, being able to see them interacting with the sculpture. It was acknowledged that that was a wrong that was committed.
We must do something to right these wrongs.
At that moment was when I really realized the impact of this project.
When we come back, I'll be presenting the award for service to the First Amendment, a topic I know a little something about.
Any financial story at the end is going to have some kind of human component to it. You know, business reporting at root is really about people. And that's what's the most powerful thing about it.
Welcome back, and I hope you're comfortable. You know, they told me I could present the award for service to the First Amendment myself because I've had a few things to say about this topic. I mean, the First Amendment is all about freedom to say what you want, pray how you like, print any kind of fake news. Not that last part. Now, the important thing about a free press is that without it, the government and private citizens would be able to do whatever they wanted with no consequences because no one would know. This award is for journalism that hammered the door down, turned on all the lights, and told it like it is. Here are the finalists for service to the First Amendment. Birth and Betrayal, a a collaboration between the Miami Herald and ProPublica.
Most people did not know that the program known as NICA even existed, and I would include most lawmakers.
These families suffered enormous trauma.
They talk about like not remembering. You get a stack of papers and you're signing, you're having a baby, and then they come back and tell you after this horrible event, you signed here on the dotted line, you're now enrolled in this program.
On our watch, from NPR and KQED.
On the first day that this transparency law was in place, we sent out somewhere between 300 and 400 of
Just
those
after midnight.
requests.
One of the really significant things that we got from our records request was 50 hours of these internal affairs interviews and dispatch audio.
One of the most shocking things on the tape was to listen to the investigators and to realize that they're really good friends with the police officers that they're supposed to be interrogating.
I'd like to put it on the record that I have had a working relationship with you in the past and want to make sure that you're okay with me interviewing you.
It was also police corruption, lies, everything you can possibly think of. These were in these records because police are called on to investigate themselves when police do something wrong.
In Democracy in Doubt, from the Arizona Republic.
There was a concerted effort to undermine trust in the results of an election.
We trace sort of the rise of the disbelief and the anxieties surrounding Trump's loss all the way through the ballot review, and we really sought to take readers behind the scenes.
We wanted this to be an accurate summary for history.
And the winner is Democracy in Doubt from the Arizona Republic.
The story really traces the origins of the Arizona ballot review.
The biggest politicians in Arizona say there was no way you lost Arizona. Where are the votes?
It was a moment when the guardrails of our government and our society were really being dismantled. I think the abiding instruction that we had was to be dramatic in the telling of this thing. Try to think of it in cinematic terms. The opening scene with the phone call from the president to Rusty Bowers, it all sounded astounding to me. It was so dramatic and compelling.
Trump and Giuliani told him there's a way we could help the president, and that Arizona had a unique law that allowed the legislature to choose its electors.
Yvonne and Ron have been political reporters at the Republic for a number of years and just had an incredible network of sources. Those sources at all levels of government were so vital in getting people to open up.
We really sought to take readers behind the scenes and take them inside the room where consequential decisions were really being made.
I try to avoid, frankly, journalists, and so I was a little hesitant, but accepted the outreach from them.
We painstakingly tried to understand how he characterized what was happening.
They wanted to make sure that they got it right, that they weren't inventing, they weren't broad brushing, that what they said was correct, and it was very comprehensive. And they went way beyond me, which I was grateful for.
You want to make sure you get it right, and I think that's what we did here.
This was not just about covering a story. This was about having a chance to truly help shape history.
We felt very strongly from the team that it was our obligation to safeguard democracy.
This next award also honors a special breed of journalists, the kind that follows the trail of the most important thing in American society: money. Presenting the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Business and Financial Reporting is MSNBC's Ali Velshi.
One of the main reasons I got into journalism was because I saw that it could hold those in positions of power to account, particularly in instances when the law and the government could not. As a business reporter, I spent years interviewing powerful CEOs, and the unscrupulous ones, aided by their wealth, would often abuse their power to advance their company's bottom line, regardless of the cost to the greater good. I found that in order to hold them accountable, you had to speak their language, money, and learn to follow that money to uncover what was really happening behind the scenes. This year's finalists for the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Business and Financial Reporting all are fluent in speaking money and have each followed the trail of ill-gotten gains to uncover wrongdoing and hold the otherwise unaccountable to account. The finalists are Boeing's Fatal Flaw by PBS Frontline in partnership with the New York Times.
You don't see planes diving on departure. I was baffled. Why did it go down?
We don't yet know what caused this crash and resulted in the deaths of more than 350 people. These are the kinds of systems that have to be investigated and looked at.
Tom is one of the best storytellers we have. He's able to combine investigative journalism with actual narrative and character.
By the time that the second crash happens, you're actually in the cockpit in this film. You're in the cockpit of the airplane. And at that moment when the pilot is reaching for two buttons, my job was to get to that point in the film, and I almost wanted to have the audience say, "Don't do that, don't do that, don't push those buttons." Ultimately, it's about the consequences of those designs and the design flaws.
The Secret IRS Files by ProPublica.
It's probably the biggest trove of government information ever obtained by a news organization.
I felt like an enormous responsibility that this had been given to us. Like I said, the IRS does not leak.
The day we obtained this information was the best day of my career, hands down.
Bankrupt by the California Newsroom.
This is the back of the house, and had a great view of the pool here. Our son's room was here. Our daughter's room is just down in this direction. The cause of the fires were demonstrated to be caused by PG&E and their power lines.
PG&E traumatized these victims once by destroying their homes, taking their loved ones in some cases, and destroying their communities. The second trauma takes place when PG&E files for bankruptcy.
Lily Jamali is able to connect with regular people whose lives have been devastated by corporate negligence and climate change.
And the winner is The Secret IRS Files by ProPublica. Let's take a deeper look at ProPublica's winning entry.
We obtained a vast trove of never-before-seen tax information on the wealthiest individuals in America. This is not waitresses or plumbers, it's not even doctors or lawyers. This is the 1% of the 1%.
I'd often heard, as we're covering the IRS, the agency doesn't leak, which was true until this happened. So the first thing that really became clear to us was these are some of the wealthiest people in the world. And if you look at how much they are worth and how much they're paying in taxes, they're not paying that much in taxes.
And when you look at their wealth growth compared to the taxes paid, an extraordinary picture emerges. Some of these guys can pay zero. It's hard to beat paying zero in taxes.
I mean, it's taxes, right? So you have to use every possible way you can to try to get through to people and make it visual and relatable and as much narrative as you can squeeze out of the story.
Warren Buffett, wealth has grown so much and he's paid so little in income tax that he's probably the greatest tax avoider in American history. Peter Thiel secretly amassed a $5 billion Roth IRA. A Roth IRA is a middle-class retirement savings vehicle, and there's supposed to be limits on it.
We are actually aware in doing this story that there was legal risk for us as an organization. You are writing stories about literally the deepest pockets in the world, and we appreciated working at a place where we felt like somebody had our back and we weren't going to back down just because we got a nasty gram from some billionaire.
Our stories have engendered bills in Congress. It doesn't really get any better than having the White House propose a law that's deeply influenced by your story. We have a system that allows the ultra-wealthy in a legal way to avoid taxes, and so they can avoid contributing to society, and that is corrosive to our democracy. To the extent that I can cover it and keep an eye on it and push back at these grave risks, I feel privileged to be able to do so.
We felt like this was a once in a lifetime or once in a generation opportunity to explore this information. So we took seriously the idea that we were doing this on behalf of basically everyone else.
And remember, you can see the full profiles of the other finalists at Newsy.com. Back to you, Hassan.
When we come back, we travel to the drought-stricken West and see another side of Smokey the Bear, mascot of the U.S. Forest Service.
I think people have this tendency to think of the Forest Service as like, you know, like your friendly government agency, like Smokey the Bear. They're protecting the trees, they're out there protecting the forests. We were able to show that that's not really happening.
Well, now it's time for a really feel-good topic, the environment. The news here is, not good. No matter how much we think we know, the rainforest is disappearing, the planet is heating up, the West is on fire, the East is underwater. Somehow, there is always more to worry about. But thanks to these journalists, once in a while, we can feel good again about crimes against nature by finding out who we can blame. Here are this year's finalists for excellence in environmental reporting, honoring Ted Scripps. Draining the Forests, a collaboration between the Arizona Republic, the Fort Collins Coloradoan, the Palm Springs Desert Sun, and the St. George Spectrum.
The starkest image for me was when we got up on a tiny airplane and flew over the Grand Mesa of Colorado. All of that water doesn't really belong to the forest and doesn't benefit wildlife. It ends up going to all of the farms and ranches and cities below it.
What our reporters found over and over is the system is actually designed to support developers, to support mines, to support other water users, even when there's not really enough water supply to sustain them.
Bringing together reporters who knew their Forest Service, who knew their rivers, who knew what was happening in the ranching and farming communities. There was no other way to really be able to tell that story.
Sacrifice Zones, mapping cancer-causing industrial air pollution, a collaboration between ProPublica, the Texas Tribune, and the Mountain State Spotlight.
ProPublica embarked on this really unprecedented effort so that people could put in their address and look up to see, what their cancer risk was due to industrial air pollution.
Our greatest pride is disseminating vital information that the public did not previously have.
An Extreme Heat's Deadly Toll by the Los Angeles Times.
A friend of mine was like, Gennaro, we have to do something on climate change. We need to go to Antarctica, we need to go to the rainforest in Brazil. And I'm like, we don't have to go anywhere, it's right at our doorstep.
We know from scientific studies going back years that there has been an undercounting of heat-related deaths. As a team of reporters and data specialists, we decided to conduct an excess death analysis. It helps explain why people don't view this as the threat that it is.
One morning when I was listening to the climate summit in Scotland, and they had mentioned our series, and I was like, wait a second.
We saw a raising of awareness about the severity of this threat and also the actions that need to be considered to better protect the public.
I read this article and was just astonished. I didn't know how many steps we really needed to take. It led immediately to our legislation.
And the winner is Sacrifice Zones, a collaboration between ProPublica, the Texas Tribune, and the Mountain State Spotlight.
We typed in my address. I saw how I was in one of the highly affected areas, the red area. It was completely shocking to me.
Some chemicals like benzene are very smelly. It smells like gasoline. You know that you're inhaling it. But other chemicals are colorless and odorless, and you can really be very highly exposed and not be aware of it at all. We ultimately identified over 1,000 hotspots of toxic air pollution across the country. We sort of looked at that map and said, this is a goldmine of stories.
ProPublica embarked on this really unprecedented effort to create a national map so that people could put in their address and look up to see what their cancer risk was. I started scrolling around on the map. When I clicked on Laredo, it showed that the industrial cancer risk there was created by a single facility. Our analysis found that about half of Laredo's 260,000 residents are at increased risk of cancer.
Critical information that the public relies on to understand the emissions in their backyards is potentially inaccurate. The EPA, in fact, only quality checks a small portion of the underlying data of the map that we made.
Without these initial conversations and all of this reporting, the Laredo story would not have become a national story.
People want the facts, and what we are giving them has been a starting point for asking for even more information.
This is something that causes a serious health concern for We formed the Clean Air Laredo Coalition. We've been reaching out to our state officials, we reached out to our congressmen, and it's just been nonstop ever since.
The House of Representatives announced a new bill which would allocate over $100 million a year to states for ambient air monitoring programs.
To know that we are carrying the burden because of one plant's business practices is just unacceptable, and we are not going to stop until that changes.
It's an absolutely vital public health concern that regulators on all levels of the government should be considering.
Now we come to what is maybe the most misunderstood category in journalism: opinion writing. I mean, everybody's got an opinion, right? But in the real world, these journalists aren't just coughing up half-baked ideas. They're backing up their point of view with actual facts. Their work spurs action. They get things done. Here to present the Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Opinion Writing is Lulu Garcia Navarro, host at the Opinion Desk at the New York Times.
When you hear the word opinion, the phrase, "that's just your opinion," might come to mind. In fact, the very idea of opinion journalism may seem like a contradiction in terms, but good opinion journalism isn't just a hot take on the latest news. It's about understanding the diverse experiences that shape those opinions, and done correctly, giving those opinions a context to help us understand otherwise puzzling perspectives and make sense of this complicated world. This year's finalists show how powerful just an opinion, when backed by fact and in the service of telling someone else's story and perspective, can be. It is my honor to present this year's Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Opinion Writing. The finalists are columnist Janae Osterheld of the Boston Globe.
It is absolutely essential that people of color, marginalized folks, Black folks get to have a voice in which they get to say exactly how they feel.
Janae is amazing. She has one of the biggest hearts of anyone I've ever met, and you can see that in her work.
It's not my job to just cover the community, it's my job to be in community with the community. Everyone has a voice, everyone has a story, so how are you using your mic to amplify their voice? So when I'm thinking about how I'm using my space, I'm thinking about how I share it.
Globe readers love her. She is a fresh voice, a perspective that a lot of people haven't heard before. On the flip side, I think there are a lot of people who are Globe readers now who weren't before Janae came to Boston.
City Hall columnist Heather Knight of the San Francisco Chronicle.
I try to wake people up and jolt them out of just their daily lives of thinking about what's for dinner or what am I going to wear in the morning, and to really think about who is that homeless person that you just walked past and ignored, or where could we build more housing?
Heather is so well researched and well sourced. Sometimes people think that she is the voice of the Chronicle.
Opinion writing by Nancy Kaffer of the Detroit Free Press.
Opinion writing is not just saying what you think. No one except like my mom, my best friend, my husband should care what I think unless I can back it up with facts and information.
Nancy is an extraordinary reporter. She has an eye for the world that's unique. So when she's writing about schools or she's writing about services that are being denied to people, she gets up close and personal with them and really can identify with them and then translate that to the written word. You feel like you're standing there talking to the people that she's interviewing, and not everybody can do that.
Policy can seem like this dry, abstract thing, but I try to write columns that are very clear that policy is directly connected to every aspect of how we live our lives.
She's really dedicated to making sure that issues like sexual assault stay in the public eye.
And this year's winner for excellence in opinion writing is city columnist Heather Knight of the San Francisco Chronicle. Congratulations.
San Francisco is a fascinating city to cover, but devastating also. It's really become a tale of two cities. Probably nowhere shows that better than Union Square with its super rich Louis Vuitton stores and Tiffany's right next door to the Tenderloin, where you can see bodies on the streets.
Heather is willing to take chances and willing to be out there and not going to back down. The beauty of that is that people are talking about Heather. They're talking about her reporting. She is the must-read columnist in the city.
But she actually does a story that encompasses compassion. The story that Heather Knight did with Lori and her daughter was a very heartbreaking story.
I got an email from a woman named Lori Steves who lived just outside Seattle. I'm trying to get my addict daughter off the streets of the Tenderloin. Her younger brother died of a drug overdose 4 months ago, and she knew that her daughter, Jessica, was also addicted to drugs and was homeless and living in San Francisco.
I randomly run into her on the street when I find her. It's because I go out and I drive around and I look for her. Nothing's reaching her.
And I'm not a social worker or a treatment expert by any means, but I figured the best way I could help her and people in general understand this crisis was to tell her story.
Result of all of Heather's reporting on this was that the mayor decides that she's going to do a cleanup of the Tenderloin.
We are in a crisis, and we need to respond accordingly.
Her mission for her journalism is to improve the conditions in what we're living. People listen to Heather Knight. City Hall listens to Heather Knight.
I know that city officials don't like getting my calls. I learned from a reader recently that my name is sometimes used as a verb. If you can't get something done at City Hall, you can Heather Knight it, and that means that you CC me, and they hope that that will get more attention.
Nobody can question whether or not she knows what she's talking about. Sometimes people think that she is the voice of the Chronicle.
Don't worry about the politicians or the bureaucrats. They're not your audience. You're writing for the regular people of San Francisco. And if you're shining a light on what's not working from City Hall in their lives, then you're doing a good job.
When we come back, a tribute to Brent Renaud and other journalists killed in the line of duty. And we'll have the presentation of the winner of this year's Scripps Howard Impact Award. So don't go away.
When I'm picking up the camera, the only thought that I have in that process is to get people to see the people we are photographing or interviewing as somebody they could relate to.
Welcome back. We cannot talk about or honor the work of journalists without acknowledging that their dedication to telling stories that need to be told can be deadly. 55 journalists lost their lives in 2021 alone. Please take a moment to remember these incredibly talented and dedicated people, these husbands, wives, partners, and reporters who are no longer with us. One filmmaker who left us too soon is Brent Renaud, who was killed by Russian forces in Ukraine in March. We're joined by his brother, Craig Renaud, in Austin, Texas.
Throughout our entire career as documentary filmmakers, it was extremely important to Brent to tell stories in real time. It was never enough for him to interview people about things they had been through in the past or shoot from a distance. Brent always wanted to be right there with them with his camera, experiencing what they were going through in real time. And that's ultimately why he paid his life in Ukraine. He wanted to get from one bridge to another to follow refugees out with all their belongings so that people could understand what they were going through. In honor of Brent Renaud and all that he stood for, I'm proud to present this year's Scripps Howard Award for Excellence in Visual Journalism. The finalists are Distanced, Pandemic Stories of Black Life in the Rural South by STAT, The Cost of War by the Associated Press, Sorrow and Defiance under Taliban Rule, Afghan Women Navigate a Landscape of Loss by the LA Times.
This is Latasha, and she lives in Georgia. Latasha's mom died from COVID. Her mom loved flowers, loved going out into the garden. And so I wanted to create an image that kind of spoke to her mom and their connection.
Bethany is a really talented photographer. She's an incredible portraitist. Just as importantly, she's from the South. She knows the region well. She has family there, and she has worked there extensively in the past, dealing with similar issues of public health.
I really view my work as contributing to this larger archive of what it means to be alive, and I specifically want to cover communities that are underrepresented in that archive. And I wanted to make sure that there were images that were evidence to what rural Black communities were going through. When I was conceptualizing this project with Alyssa, I didn't want it to be all one tone. I wanted to cover healthcare workers, family members that were surviving. I wanted to cover a funeral because I had not seen very many funerals being visualized.
The one that I really loved in a small town in Florida where a very beloved woman in the town had passed away from COVID, and the community came out to memorialize her at her funeral. Bethany had photographed her casket being carried by a beautiful horse and buggy. This moment here I felt was like such pure childhood. Bethany and I both really appreciated that there's this moment amongst this very tragic event where you can still see that the tragedy hasn't completely enveloped everything.
I'm really just proud that that work exists. I think that there's so much value in paying attention and being present with someone, and so that's what I strive to do in all of my work, is to really connect and make someone feel seen and heard.
The Cost of War by the Associated Press.
It was heartbreaking to see your workplace that you consider home being reduced to a rubble in a blink of an eye.
It still blows my mind that the team had the presence of mind to then set up a camera on an adjacent building and actually capture the destruction of the Bureau live as it was happening. We rely on Gazans to tell the story of Gaza, and the fact that they can be so dedicated to what they do and so committed to our values and to the value of the journalism that they do is really an incredible gift.
Our idea was to tell the story of 4 wars in a different way, utilizing new techniques, geolocations, aerial shots, motion graphics.
I keep going to war zones because people there living through these moments, possibly the worst moments of their lives. These stories have to be told. We showed one small area of Gaza, one small neighborhood that has suffered consequences in this war. I spent quite some time with the Nasir family. I first saw them because their house had no walls, but they were sitting inside what was their apartment before, kind of looking at the courtyard while all the children were playing, and they just sat there for most of the day. That was very touching for me to witness that and spend some time with them there.
This was the 4th war covering. I knew that I had to continue working to put aside our grief, our shock, and continue doing the job because there were people, they needed help. So we had to go to talk to them, to tell their stories.
It was how we looked into a place that is otherwise very hard to see into in all times, not just during times of war, but during times of relative stability. And that team, they were not just doing work on behalf of the AP, they're doing work on behalf of everyone in the world.
Sorrow and Defiance, Afghan Women Navigate a Landscape of Loss Under Taliban Rule by the LA Times.
The thing I'm trying to do with my photographs is to get people to see the people we are photographing or interviewing as somebody they could relate to. See them from the point of view of, this could be your sister, this could be your mother. We are not that much different.
It takes a special breed for someone to be a war correspondent or war photographer, but he thrives on it for sure.
After the American withdrawal and watching the Taliban enter in, and I saw the writing on the wall that women were the biggest losers in this whole equation.
Marcus, he had no support, but he wanted to stay. And I'm like, everybody's pulling out, Marcus. Like, it's time for you to go. And he goes, I want to stay, and I'll be all right.
I was pretty much working alone with the help of, a translator and a driver, tried to track down all these women. I was pulling out all the tools out of my photographic bag and trying to be creative as possible. And I had to work with what I had, or a bouquet of flowers, or a reflection of a tinted window. This is Lita, and she had been scarred so badly that it was easy to identify her in pictures. And I remember looking over at this window with these translucent curtains with like these gold-colored embroidery, and I thought to myself, this is a significant way to give her back her dignity.
What I love about this photo is that you can see her face and not see her face. You can see the fear and anxiety as she peeks out of the window of this safe house.
Almost every interview that I've done with the story has resulted in somebody crying in front of me, and I oftentimes feel really awful, but all I can do is capture their testimony in full and try to bring out the best parts of their stories.
And the winner is The Cost of War by the Associated Press.
Thank you, Craig. And a thank you to all of the journalists who risked their lives to make us better informed about the world around us. We have come at last to our final award of the night, Final Impact, literally. This Impact Award is for the entry among all 42 finalists that has had the greatest impact. A special group of judges got together to bestow this award. In addition to an actual trophy, the winner of the Impact Award will also receive an additional $10,000 in prize money. The winner of this award best symbolizes journalism's role in promoting transparency, clarity, accountability, and understanding. And the 3 finalists for this year's Impact Award are Extreme Heat's Deadly Toll by the Los Angeles Times.
We saw a raising of awareness about the severity of this threat.
It led immediately to our legislation.
Pandora Papers, a global investigation by the ICIJ, the Washington Post, and media partners.
We will still be talking about the Pandora Papers, I hope, in not only 6 months, but in 6 years' time.
And Sacrifice Zones, mapping cancer-causing industrial air pollution by ProPublica in collaboration with the Texas Tribune and the Mountain State Spotlight.
We ultimately identified over 1,000 hotspots of toxic air pollution.
And the winner, the Scripps Howard Impact Award for this, the 69th annual Scripps Howard Scripps Award is The Pandora Papers by ICIJ, the Washington Post, and media partners. We now go to Washington, D.C., where journalists from the Post and the ICIJ have gathered to watch the award show.
I'm Debbie Sensiper, and on behalf of the more than 60 journalists at the Washington Post that were involved in this important project and that took part in this unprecedented media collaboration, thank you very much. We are thrilled and honored.
And I'm Will Fitzgibbon, and on behalf of the team at ICIJ, as well as the 600 reporters who worked on this project, we want to thank you for recognizing the global impact that truly collaborative cross-border journalism can have. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, everyone, and congratulations to all the finalists and the winners. Let's all remember that without the hard work, sacrifice, and the tenacity of journalists, we would not know what was happening in Ukraine or in Washington, on land or online. So thank you for joining us, and have a good night.
I have a job where I get to live out the values I was raised with.
We do what journalists do, which is that we went back, and we weren't going to go away until someone spoke to us.
Our mission as journalists is to bring us together and see each other eye to eye.
What I like to do is to tell the story, meet the people who are living through the events, and give a little bit of historic context.
I think I'm most proud of the fact that we actually did it and it worked. And we were able to do it in a way where we had meaningful reporting that provided useful information to a variety of communities.
I'm surrounded by extraordinarily smart, dedicated,
ambitious colleagues, and we all are pulling in the exact same direction.
I live here, right? I have the same questions as everyone else. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not just here for the first week after a tragedy and then moving on.
I think I'm most proud of that, we gave voice to these people who don't really have voices often in the media,
I love investigative reporting, and I love reporting in general because it allows me to step into other people's shoes. It allows me to see the world from all of these different perspectives and meet people I never would have met.
Really be able to see the true impact of it. That's the pride of storytelling and investigative reporting for me.
I don't think our job is to help people necessarily, right? Our job is to get at the truth. But it is really nice when those goals kind of align. It's incredibly rewarding, and you can't expect that every day in this work, but I feel like getting it every once in a while is what keeps us going.